Hello everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and today we're going to start our sew along for the Alex Shorties and the Sydney Dungarees, which are part of a series of patterns by a company called 5Berries. Now 5Berries is the number 5 and the word berries, and their website is .com, and I'll just put a link down here for you so that you can find it, because I found that I have made these before but I didn't record it, but I made those for my granddaughter Clementine. I think I did the 12-month age on those ones. Now they're a great versatile dungaree. On the smaller sizes they have buttons along the inseam or poppers along the inseam so that you can do nappy changes really quite easily, and it's just got enough detail to be a not challenging sew, but enough detail to look as if it's a challenging sew. But actually, if we take everything step by step and take our time, and then with a few tips and tricks along the way, then actually they turned out really, really special. So I thought that you'd all like to have a little look at this and just to see how we're gonna how they all come together is what I wanted to say. So I'm going to pop you along to the pattern company, 5berries.com, where you want to choose your pattern. So the Alex Shorties go up to 2 years, from 0 to 2 years, and then the Sydney dungaree pattern is the one that takes over from those sizes, and that goes from age 3 to 13, and that doesn't have the inseam buttons. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be making some for the niece of my daughter-in-law Sarah, and her niece is called Eve, and Eve's mum is called Ruth, so lots of names there, but these are especially for Eve as a gift, and I just wanted to have I go at making them again for you on video, and it's always lovely to have somebody to make things for. So I reached out to Ruth via Sarah and they agreed, and so yes, here we are. They've chosen the fabric as well, which is a good choice, and we'll talk about that as we go down. So for now, pop across to 5Berries, have a look and buy your pattern. They're very reasonably priced. I think when I was looking, and it's now February 2023 when I'm recording this section of the video, it'll be over February, March. Then the pattern was $6.90. So for that pattern to go, and that's the same for either the 0 to 2 years, you have to buy that one, and then if you're in the larger age group then you can do the 3 to 13, and both patterns were the same price. So actually I think that's a really good value pattern. You'll get it electronically by PDF, so you'll be able to go onto the website, and on the website there is a link on one of the tabs at the top that tells you how to print your pattern. Follow those instructions really carefully. The really, really important one that you need to do is to print it out at the actual size or at 100%. Don't scale to fit, don't do anything else, just always at 100%. Normally a pattern will have a little square on it that's either 1 inch or 2 inches wide, so that you can print off that one page first with your chosen settings and then measure it and make sure that that's right. Now that's the only thing that I would suggest as an upgrade to the patterns from 5Berries that would be really helpful, because there's nothing like that little bit of reassurance to know that you've printed your pattern out correctly at the right size. It isn't there, so just print it out as we've said, and then we'll be ready to start. So I have my pattern here. I'd already got the 0 to 2 years already printed out. So what I've done is I've printed out now, I bought and printed out the 3 to 13 age group so that I can show you how all that goes together. And then we'll talk about how you identify your sizes. So if this is the first time you've worked with a pattern, hopefully I'll cover all of your queries and make it easy for you. But I'm hoping that because the lady who has, well, the person who has designed the pattern on the 5Berries website has put all that detail of how to print, I'm not going to cover that because technicals and computers is not my thing. Sewing machines I can do, but computers, if they're working or not working quite correctly, is not so good. So I'm going to rely on the advice there for you, and then once you have printed it out, and it's printed out in black and white so that doesn't use too much ink, and there's 20 pages in total, which I know seems like a lot, but we'll talk about the pattern in a second, and I'll tell you why I feel that's really good value for money as well. So settle yourselves in. If you're watching this before you have a go, then hopefully you'll find it interesting. This is going to be the first of a start of videos where I'm hoping to introduce you to sewing things for children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, your own children, or just the neighbour's child down the street, whatever you want to do, because I think they're really rewarding, and they're one of my favourite things to sew clothes for children, because there's no fitting really generally. But also, if you have got a child who's slightly longer in the leg or slightly rounder in the tummy, then you can absolutely accommodate for that within your pattern as well, and that might be a subject for a further video in the future, but just know that it is possible. So if you've got a particularly tall but thin child, or a shorter but slightly rounder child, you can make clothes that fit and look adorable on them without having to be stuck with what's in the shops. Okay, enough waffling. Hopefully I've whetted your appetite. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoy this series. There's going to be probably a few videos to pull it all together, because I try and keep them about an hour and a half long just for the upload time. But we'll be covering some of it now, and then we'll then move on, and in the end we'll end up with a finished garment. It'll all be chaptered, so you'll be able to jump ahead as you want, and then you can always save the video and come back for future reference. So perhaps you know how to put the trousers together, but you don't know how to do the pockets, or you don't know how to do the side poppers on the side, or the inseam, that type of thing. So we can talk all about that. But I hope you like the pattern, and I hope you like the video. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is about the pattern. When it's printed out, you will get 20 pages that look kind of like this. So you'll have some bits where lines are going off the sides, and like on this page, you get these little triangles or diamonds that are in the corners as well. And then you get some indication on here as to what it is. So as we can see here, this piece is page 1. It's for the side closure interfacing A on the front. We've got to cut 2. We're going to fuse it to the lining, so we'll do all of that in another step. But all of these lines here might look a bit daunting and a bit confusing to you. So I'm going to help you work out which one of those you need to follow, and how you follow it round curves, and how we stick all of this pattern together. So the first thing we're going to do is stick the pattern together and get our pages ready for doing that. And that's going to give us one big master pattern. Now, what I do suggest is that although on the designer's website it says that you can print these out in layers, so like this pattern here is for 3 years to 13 years, you might choose your child's 8 years, and you might think, oh, I'll just print it off, and I'll just print off the 8-year size. I'll save paper, I'll save ink, and it'll be a lot better to do. My recommendation to you would actually be to once you understand where the lines are in your head, and we'll go on to that bit in a second, but to print out the whole pattern from age 3 years to age 13, because once you've got this pattern printed, we're then going to trace off the pieces we need, and only trace off the pattern pieces. That way you're only using one set of ink, one set of paper, and you then only have to do one set of cutting out and sticking this all together. So I do believe that whilst you'll then have to trace off your individual pattern sizes as you go along, it'll make it easier for you to make any alterations to that pattern. And in the future, should your niece or nephew want them, or a daughter or a granddaughter, you've got this pattern then printed out forever. And that's why I think it makes it such good value for money, because you've got the electronic copy, and yes, you can print it out every time, but when you see the work that we're going to go through in cutting this out and sticking it together, then for me, I will, it's just a recommendation, you can do whatever you like, but I would recommend you print out the whole pattern, all of the ages in one go, and then learn how to pick out the ones that you want. And we've got some tips and tricks to help you with that. So that would be my recommendation. And I'll show you how we start to cut these pages out. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually put all the pages into order. So they're not printed out in the right order. I'm sure there's a reason for that with the designer, but I'm just putting them into pages, into sections now, so that we can then follow how we then sort these pages out. Because I think once you've got them in order, you can then start to feel a little bit more in control of what you're actually doing. Okay, so the next thing that you need to do then is to find your instructions, the tutorial, which will be one of the files that are downloaded with your pattern. And at the end of there, on page 15 and 16, I think it is, 15 and 16, yep, then there are layout pictures for these pattern pages of the PDF. So they're right at the bottom there, so page 15 and 16 on mine. This is for the Sydney Shorties, Sydney Dungarees that I'm looking at just for this pattern, for sticking together, because that's the pattern I've printed out. So there should be a corresponding page on the Alex Shorties instructions as well, because the designers tend to do it similarly. Now I'm going to do the shorts, which is so they're cut off just above the knee, because I think that's the look that I'm going for with these dungarees. So there's a different layout whether or not you have the shorts at 3 to 13. Oh, that's not scrolling for me. Or whether you have the full length dungarees, and there's pages for that. So choose whether you're making full length or whether you're making the shorties. And then, as I say, on the tutorial page, page 15 to 16, I'm going to follow this page 15. That's the layout I want. So I can see there's 4 pages across, and then there's 5 rows down, and that's where I'm going to do mine. I can also see that there's a break between the pages 12 and 13, that there's no carryover of those pattern pieces on the design going across. So I know then that I can paste together the first 12 pages together and then the final 6 pages, and that will give me the design and the layout that I want. So now I know that, I can now tape together my pattern with confidence. So for the next bit, we're going to just trim some page edges, and for this you're just going to need your paper scissors. I use this Magi tape, but you can use sellotape, and then a couple of pattern weights just to be able to hold the pattern pieces down and in the right place for you. And the first thing that we're going to do on page 1 is we're just going to take off this edge here. And we're cutting right on the back, the black margin line that goes all the way around the edge. So I've taken off this much, and now we can see that this diamond here is right on the very edge. So that's what we're going to be working with, because the next thing that we're going to do is take page 2, put those two on the side there, and we're going to take page 2. Let me just tip you down slightly more, hold on 1 second. So I'm going to take page 2, and now what I do is I match up those diamonds to make a whole complete shape. So you just make sure that they're lining up on the edge and the black of the line goes together. And if you follow your lines, if there's a line that's a break, then you should have lines that go straight across and that all join together. So here I can follow that line, and that goes smoothly into this one. And then at the top here, this line goes smoothly into that. So now I'm going to put a weight onto each page to hold it down for me whilst I get my sellotape ready. Let's just hope I can find, oh, if I can find the end, that's good. And then you can either put little bits of sellotape down, but I do find it's useful to stick down the whole section. Now this Scotch Magic tape, I don't know if you've seen it before, it's a matte finish, but it does enable you to write over the over your tape, whereas ordinary sellotape doesn't. So just bear that in mind. I know it's a little bit more expensive, but it is really good for pattern making and pattern drafting. Okay, so we've got that page on now. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take this page 3, and I'm going to trim off one side of that. So the side that's going to put up against my page 2, I'm going to cut it on the black line all the way along, and then lay it over so that the triangles match and that the lines match as well. So you've got a triangle at the bottom and you've got lines matching all the way up. We're then going to do what we've done again and just put out, holding it tight, and put our pattern weights on, take a length of our tape and then stick it together. So we've nearly got one row of our pattern made. We can just move that across, and on this one I'm just going to take off the other side of this one so that can lie on top of there. And you just choose, I mean, if you've not got, well, you will have paper scissors, won't you? But you can fold the pattern pieces as well, just the edges are back. But I do find that if you do go to the trouble of actually cutting it off, it does mean that the pattern lies flatter when you have to come and store it. So that's one of the hardest things, is when these have been printed out, how do you actually store them? I either roll mine up or I fold mine up and then put it in a plastic freezer bag, and that's the way that I do mine. So as I say, we'll just put that together. So on the next row we're going to be cutting off 2 edges because it's going to be in the middle. So let's just move those ones up. We found our page 5, so the first thing I'm going to do is take off this top level on page 5 because we need that to butt up to the line on the bottom of page 1. We're on our second row now. Let's bring this over here. So I can see the triangle here for page 1, and I leave this little bit as an overlap. I don't cut both pages off on the line. I like that there's that extra little bit left in order to line this all up, and it just seems to be a little bit more supportive for it. So again, we're lining this up so the triangles all match and all look lovely, diamonds, whatever you want to call them. And then I put pattern weights on again and tape that one down. So there's a bit of a theme here, it's just cutting and pasting, but I just wanted to go over with you what happens when you go over the edge of onto the next row so that you know where you are. So now on this next one I will be cutting off 2 edges, the top edge and this left hand edge here, so that this piece can sit straight onto here, and then that will continue across as we're going through. So we cut off 2 edges on this next one, and then we just continue to build the pattern together like that. And it will give us, it's a really good way, I mean children's patterns are a good way as a big indication of going into PDF patterns, because if you don't have to wait for one to come through the post, you can get on with your project so much quicker, and it just opens up a whole world of pattern designers that you might not have had access to had they only have offered physical paper patterns, because obviously you can take it and print it at home. Some designers do what's called print shop copies as well. They'll actually have extra big, large versions of their patterns printed onto A0 paper, which then can be sent to a specialist copying company and they can be printed out. But I don't have access to one of those, so I tend to do it on this A4 paper. And that has generally worked very well for me. You're trying to get everything to lie really flat. You're not looking for any bumps and wrinkles in the paper at all, because you want the pattern to lie as flat as your fabric will be lying once you start tracing this off. So that's where we are with what we're doing. So I'm just going to carry on now. You can see how this is all building up. I'm just going to carry on now and build up for this set for the next pieces, and then keep working down. Obviously it's going to go off the edge of my table and I haven't got enough room for that, but if you do the same for yours, print it out, get sort of cut off the edges where you don't, and then you're joining them together so that you've got these triangles here and then these here all match as perfectly as you can, and then you've got your lines that just run smoothly into each other as well. That's what you're looking for over the edge of the pages. Okay, I'll see you in a few moments when we've got all of this put together. Okay, so I've got all of mine taped together. This is pages 13 to 20, just so that we can talk about this. The first thing you need to do is to go to your, if you haven't already, grab your child and then measure them, and use the measurement chart within, it's on the actual pattern purchase pages of the website, so you can see the sizing as to which one you need to buy in the first place, whether your child fits into the 0 to 2 or the 3 to 13 age group. And obviously in some cases that's going to be obvious which one they go into, but if they're in that cusp, they're probably 1.5 to maybe 3.5, I would look at the measurements on both patterns, because you may find that actually they're better suited to one or the other, and that would be the best way to go. So have a look on the size charts on the pattern, either in the instructions when you've bought it, if you're buying a certain range, or the measurements, and then choose the best that you can that fit your child the best. If you need some extra width, we can talk about that, and if you need some extra length, we can talk about that. But if there's any extra pattern adjustments, that's not really going to be covered in this video. This is just purely about how to use a PDF pattern and how to get a completed pair of shorts at the end of it. So we're not going into particular fit issues at this moment in time. And absolutely, there might be some children who've got physical disabilities and needs extra room in certain areas, and that's all just a little bit too specialist for this one video. But that's something that is very possible with that, and there's lots of videos available on YouTube and blog type posts which will help you look for that. So search for that term, adding extra length, adding extra width in the places that you need to do it. But for now, we've taped together our pattern. I've got 2 separate pages, because I split mine between page 12 and 13. and then we've got these pieces here. So this is going to look a bit daunting at first when you first start to look at it, because you've got all of these lines all coming together. The first thing you need to do is find something like this, and this is a size reference guide. So this tells you what the denomination is for each line for giving each sizes, because all of that, the size information on each one would be too much. Again, even more information. So the different lines have got different combinations of dots or dashes or straight lines or completely dashes or what have you. And that corresponds to your line. So for example, if I was making a size 8 dungarees, then mine's got 2 dashes, a long line, 2 dashes and then a gap. So I know that when I'm looking at my pattern, if I go over here to where it's quite clear where the pattern is, then I can look for a pattern piece that has 2 dashes, a long one, 2 dashes and then a gap. And I know that that is the size that I am going to be cutting out. Likewise, it's fairly easy if you're doing the smallest or the biggest sizes, but again, just choose your pattern along here. And if you're going to be picking up your pattern and putting it down again and not using it all in one go, my recommendation would be to get either a pencil or a coloured felt tip and just circle your size and the line that you're looking for on your pattern, because then you'll know that that's the one that you're looking for all the time. If you've got some coloured felt tips around, or if you've got a highlighter pen, then you can go ahead and look for that design of line, whatever it is that you're using. So in that one, it's a long line and 2 dashes. So that's going to be this one just here. And then you can then, oh, I'm off screen, hold on one second. And then what you can do is just take your coloured pencil and just run over, coloured felt tip and just run over that line to just highlight that one, that's the one that you're going to be tracing off. And that will take a lot of the stress out of what you're doing. If you do it at this stage, then it does take a lot of stress out of how you're cutting. So let me find a coloured pencil and I'll show you how different that makes everything look. Okay, for example, so we've circled the size 5 in pencil, and if you use your pencil, you can rub it out again. But if you wanted to, you could then, oops, top's come off. You could then highlight this line here and your size on your chart, and then we look for that size here, and then we just draw a line across that page, that particular part of the pattern. And as you can see, that really makes your line that you're going to be working with stand out, so that when you're tracing, you know that you're tracing this red line. The other place that is a really good tool to help you with is when you come to a section like this. Let me just lift it up for you so you can see. So where these lines cross together, it can be a bit complicated. So what I always do is I always highlight the line going into it, or identify the line going into it. I then identify the other line coming out the other side of it and draw into that as well, because I can follow that line across to one point and I can follow this line down to the other, and then I can see that I've got the right and the correct 2 there because they're both joined together at the right place. So that then just helps you navigate around these corners and just makes it easier for you to follow. And obviously in the future, if you wanted to do a size 10 in the future or a size 7, then you just choose a different colour felt tip or pencil, and you just then, or if you've used a pencil, then you just rub out your marks and start again, or you'd perhaps use a green or a yellow, and then you can then follow that through. Let me see if I can find a line where you go into a curve where the lines all go together, because that can be quite challenging. So like on the dungarees here, we again need to find our line. So I find a nice clear bit where I can see the line that I'm working with, which is this one just here. And I highlight that for the bottom of this pocket. Oops, going off a little bit. But then I can then see the start of that line going up when there's so many other lines, and I can just follow that one line then all the way up. If the lines merge into one, it just basically means that all sizes start and finish at the same point. And so you don't need to worry too much about that. Just hit a middle point within that section if you want to, and then you know where you are. And obviously that's going to go right across the top there. So let's just put that line just in there. Oops, gone out of the lines a bit there, haven't I? I must be a bit of a rebel. So that's what I would do now. Choose your size, go ahead and mark up all your pattern pieces so that you can see how you're working with. And even on the camera I can see this is standing out so much better now that it's in red and I know which one that I'm going to be tracing. Likewise on the back here where we've got the back pocket placement, just choose your size. So that's my line number 5. So let me just put that across there. And then I can trace that down. And that's the only one we're going to be tracing when we trace our size. We're just identifying the size that we want to trace off. We'll ignore everything else for this moment. But when you pack your pattern away and then you need to get it out in a year's time or 2 or 3 years' time or for a different child, then you'll go in and you'll mark up your next size that you're going to be tracing, and you'll identify that with a different colour, and then you'll be off to identify that and work with that. So I hope that helps with working with PDF patterns, just to get you up and get you started with this, because the next thing we're going to talk about is tracing your pattern off, and you'll see that that makes things a lot simpler. The other thing with tracing your pattern off means that you're not working with this thick paper, because photocopier paper isn't ideal for working on fabric. It's very thick to be pinning through for your fingers, whereas the tracing paper is so much finer. The other thing is, if you do want to make any adjustments and you want to add any width or you want to add any length, you're not then cutting up your master pattern. So I will now always keep this pattern intact for future use, and every time I want to use a different size, I'll come back to this master pattern, trace off my new size, make any pattern adjustments that I think I need for that child, and then I've always got this pattern. So this, you then got one set of printing and one set of sticking together. You're not having to keep doing that all the time. So I hope that helps. What I'm going to do now is get my tracing paper, and then we'll get some tracing done, and we'll be ready then to talk about fabric. Okay, so I've got some tracing paper here. I just buy mine from a local craft shop. They just have it there. It's not expensive. I live in Spain and I go to Offi Papel for mine, and this is only a few euros, probably €3 for about 20 sheets, and they're quite big, and they're great for working with when I'm doing adult patterns as well. There is a shiny side to it, and there is a more matte side, and I prefer to draw onto the matte side. I feel the pencil works better onto that. And I also, if you haven't got tracing paper, you can use greaseproof paper works, but you'll need to use quite a strong pencil with that, or a permanent marker, because with it being greaseproof, then ink doesn't tend to stick on it, and you'll tend to get ink on your fingers, which makes it not very nice to work with. But all you want really is just something, it's got to have a little bit of substance to it, because you're going to be pinning this and manipulating it on your pattern pieces. But you need it still to be transparent so that you can see through it like this. Now, if you're struggling, you can hold to see through your lines through your paper, because perhaps yours is a little bit thicker than mine. You can always use some of your tape to tape your pattern up against a window or a patio door, and then have the light shining through, obviously in the daytime when the light can come through, and that will actually give you a nice clear outline to follow then. And if you have highlighted your pen, or you can clearly distinguish what your chosen line is for your size, then you can just copy that straight off. Okay, so that's it on tracing paper. So I'm going to trace mine off now. I've got I'm not going to use a permanent pen, because I have got just an ordinary pencil I'm going to use to trace mine. So just smooth my fabric paper down. If you wanted to, you can always iron your paper. Just do it without any steam, and that will then just take any crinkles out, because you want your paper to be as smooth as possible. And then you're going to use your pattern weights again to hold your tracing paper in place on your pattern, so that it's not going to move whilst you're tracing off. So for straight lines, I will use a ruler. So I've got a little quilting ruler here. You can just use a ruler like you are at school. And what I do is, so I can see the red through here, I'm going to trace off this size 5 for now. And the first thing that I do is just kind of mark all the intersections. So I've just marked at the top here, and then I go across to this section here, because I'm tracing off now the back lining. I go down to the bottom, there's another intersection there, and another corner here. The reason I do that is that when I'm tracing, if anything shifts slightly, these lines aren't going to match up straight away. I'll immediately know that they're not matching, and then I can stop what I'm doing, make sure I get everything all lined up again first before I carry on, because those few little millimetres of shift, if it twists slightly, could be the difference between you knowing that a pattern piece fits perfectly, or that when it's made in your fabric, or that it's just slightly off. And it's always better to be as precise as possible with this. Once I've got my lines marked and my little corners, intersections, then I'll just go back and draw in all of the straight lines. I draw all my straight lines first on this one pattern piece, making sure that you stay on those lines. You don't want to veer off, because they've all been designed for at that particular measurement for a reason. Okay, so I've got some nice clear lines then, and then what I can do then is start and go round and trace in very carefully any curved lines. If you've got a French curve, which looks like this, it's just a pattern master's pattern drafter's tool, but that's got some lovely curves, then what you can do is use one of those to match up the curves that you've got on your pattern against the curve as far as it'll go on your French curve. Get my words right. And then you can draw that in as you go around. It just makes it's a bit like you're being a bit more precise, I suppose, really, than just freehanding it. But so long as you're confident that you're following the lines, then you don't need to have any special equipment. You can just draw it. Like this bottom line here is slightly curved, and I'm very happy just to follow it along and just to draw it in like this. And just, oh, you're slightly off screen, hold on 1 second. So like the bottom just here, I'm just colouring that in. Just take it nice and steady, and then you'll get your pattern piece on there. Once you've drawn the outline, then I want you to have a look for any little notches. So a notch is, let me show you on this pattern here. It can either be a little triangle that's on the actual part of the actual pattern piece. So here, our joining triangles for the paper, we now ignore those. So I'm not talking about those kind of notches. So those, if they show, you can just ignore those once you've got your pattern all together. But the other thing that you need is a little notch. And on this pattern, designer uses this little line just here. So each of the sizes has got a corresponding little notch just there, and we need to mark that onto our pattern pieces. Likewise, if you've got any arrows, like this piece here has one for straight of grain, we're going to copy that and write on it what it is. And then we're also going to label up our pattern pieces. I was just having a look to see if there's anything else, but I think that's all. Sometimes you have little dots as well, and we'll talk about dots and Tailor's tacks if we have any of those to do. Sorry for all the crinkling and crumpling of paper. And just smooth this down, just make it so I can see now my pattern piece has moved off with me bringing that piece of paper in, so I can just straighten this bit up to make sure that everything's right. Okay, so now I'm going to locate the notch for that size. I don't need to trace off all the other sizes on this pattern piece, just the one notch, just the size that is touching the line that I'm going to be working with, and that's inside the pattern piece. So that's one notch just there for that. No other notches, but I have got a symbol here, which is an arrow up to a centre line, and then a long arrow down with an arrow on each side, and that tells me that that piece there is going to be placed onto a fold. So I'm going to write now fold on the side here. So I've copied the symbol and I've written fold there, so that reminds me. I'm also going to write in here, so this is the Sydney shorts, and I've copied off 5 years. I write out what it is, so this is the back lining, and it says to cut one on fold, so I copy that out as well. The other bit of information that is sometimes included on the pattern or sometimes in the instructions is what seam allowance has been allocated to a pattern, and I think that's always really useful to write it down as to what the seam allowance is. And we can see on here seam allowance is included in our pattern and is 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre. So I'm going to put S/A for seam allowance just as a shortcut, 1 centimetre, and then in brackets I'm putting 3/8 of an inch so that I remember that. So then I can look at my pattern again, give it a piece and give it one final check. Yep, happy with all of that. And then I can lift it off my paper and we can see we've got a good copy. And that now looks so much simpler now that we've got rid of all the lines that we don't need, but actually we've still got our master pattern intact for if we want to do anything in the future. So all that needs to happen now is that I can now cut out this pattern very carefully on the line, being careful not to shave any out of the actual pattern itself. And then I'm going to make a pile of all my pattern pieces. So that's what I'm going to do next. So you can do all of this before you've actually bought your fabric, because this is all your prep work really, ready for what we're going to be doing next, which will be talking about the fabric that we want to use for this pattern. So I am going to carry on cutting this out. So there's my finished pattern piece, already labelled up and all ready to go with my notch marked and my fold line marked and everything on there that I need in case this pattern piece gets separated from the rest. So that, and the other thing I should perhaps write on here is just that the pattern designer is 5Berries, so that I know where to look for should I need to find anything to do with this pattern in the future. Okay, let's talk about fabric. Okay, so if we go back to the pattern pages, and this is the actual pattern page of 5Berries and their shop pattern, we can see the picture here of the Alex Shorties with a lovely ruffle on the shoulder there for the children. And then we've got several pictures down the bottom, just close-up pictures really of what's happening. But if we click on the one that's got some of the instructions, and if I just blow this up, if I can, no I can't, okay, hold on a second, we can blow it up with that. We can see that we get quite a lot of information here that we actually need in order to be able to work out what we're going to be working with this pattern. So fabrics for summer, for a summer weight garment, it would suggest a linen, a cotton poplin, quilting fabrics. Now quilting fabrics are an excellent choice, and I'll go into that in a session Y. Lightweight denim or gauze. Now gauze I found interesting to sew with, but the rest of them I would absolutely confirm that. I mean, it'd be fabulous in linen, and the quilting fabrics, you get such a wealth of design, novelty and florals and geometrics and plains with a really hard wearing resilience to them that you need for children's clothes. So that's a really good option. And then it says fabrics for winter, twill, which is like a bit like a chino type fabric, corduroy, again I could see these in corduroy really beautifully, quilting fabrics again, and denim. So you know that by looking at these fabric suggestions on the pattern that this is what the designer has chosen for this. All of these fabrics are called a woven fabric. There's no stretch in any of these fabrics at all. You might be able to use a stretch denim if it's got minimal stretch, but I certainly wouldn't use anything like a cotton jersey or a French terry or something with much more stretch, because you're going to have some problems with some of the details in terms of the garment lying flat and sewing up correctly and getting you that really lovely crisp finish. So those are the fabric suggestions that are on the pattern. The other thing that you get is you get this line drawing as well for the pattern as well. So next to a design you get a line drawing to show you what the features are on that as part of that pattern. So again, lots of information, and if we go down to the bottom here as well, it again shows you the fabrics here that you can use. So there's a lot of information here in order for you to look at and to decide whether this is the pattern for you or not before you start. Again, we've already gone past that point of no return because I know this is the pattern that I want to use, but it just reminds me what fabrics that they've got here that we can use. And in fact, we've chosen a quilting weight cotton, so I'll go and get that one for you and I'll show you that and talk to you about why I think that's a really good choice. Okay, I've just raided my stash for some fabrics. Now, this is what I used previously to make the dungarees for my granddaughter Clementine, and they turned out really nice. It's quite a busy, ditzy kind of print, but it's 100% cotton, so it's really nice and strong. There's no stretch in that at all on straight of grain at all. Little bit on the bias, but we don't work with the bias at all on this project, so that's fine. So everything running north or south or east or west to the selvage edge, the bound edge, then it's really nice and robust. I mean, this kind of printed cotton here, you can tell it's printed because it's plain on the back side, and then all the colour and vibrancy is on the top, is really easy to work with, and the colours don't tend to fade either, so that works really well. Also got another this is more like a cotton poplin, just a little bit, it is got a little bit of stiffness to it when you're working with it, but that keeps it looking really crisp, and that makes beautiful clothes. So that's another one. This one's a heavier weight quilting cotton, but just got a really nice soft handle to it. So you can see that that feels really soft to the skin, and would be great for a summer weight project or for a winter weight project in the right design. But really lovely and just so hard wearing as well. So I really do like the quilting cottons. You can get those in quilting shops or online. If you're looking for children's fabrics in the UK, then there's a company called Higgs and Higgs, HIGGS, and the ampersand, you know, the little symbol for the and sign, and Higgs again. And they do some amazing fabrics as well. I haven't got any of theirs here at the moment, but they do some really, really lovely ones. This is the fabric that my chosen recipient, mum has chosen for her, which is this lovely pastel-y floral here, which should look really, really nice. I'll just hold that up to the camera for you to see the colours a little bit better. And that's fairly true. It's a bit of a yellowy cream background to it. And then we've got that jade and that almost pistachio colour on it, haven't we, in the pink as well. So that's going to look really nice. And I think that's going to come out really nicely. So I'm pleased with that choice. The other thing that I've used for some dressmaking before is something called cotton poplin. And this one, you can see the difference between the cotton poplin, hopefully, which is this one here. So this is thinner, but it feels stiffer. So it's all down to the way that the fabric is woven. And this one, again, it would make a lovely pair of dungarees, but just slightly stiffer. Whereas this one here has got this lovely softness. If I get one edge of it for you and just show you. This one here it's just this lovely, you can see how just lovely it crinkles up, whereas this one stays a little bit stiffer as you're crinkling it. Hopefully you can see the difference that there is a difference between those two fabrics. But again, using a corduroy, using a denim, all of those types of things you can use. There's so much choice that you can make the same pattern a number of times, and people won't tell that it's the same pattern because it's just so versatile. And especially if you do long legs or the shorter legs as well, you can just ring those changes. Put the sleeve ruffle on for a girl, leave it off for a girl, back pockets or not. And again, we can just trim them up however we want and accent them however we wish. So the fabric that we're going to go for is this one here. So the first thing that I would also recommend that you do once you've chosen your fabric is that you put it into the washing machine, and before you cut it out or do anything else with it, you wash it at the same temperature and on the same setting, use the same detergents, etc., as you would wash the clothes when it's finished. So that perhaps needs to be a little bit higher for a child, because sometimes there can be potty accidents on clothing, and sometimes they can get strong food stains down them. So again, wash it higher than you think you might need to. So I think this was washed to 40 degree. So you could also go up to a 60 degree with a cotton as well, because it'll handle that with the print. And the reason for that is that sometimes in some fabrics you can get some colour run, so you need to be aware of that before you start working with it and put all your time and effort into making the garment. But the other thing is that actually there can be a little bit of shrinkage as well, so we want that shrinkage to come out of the fabric before we start working with it, because if you've already cut out your pattern pieces and then you take it over to the ironing board and iron a seam, then as soon as you put that steam onto that garment or those pieces of that garment, if there's any shrinkage and you've not got that out already, that's going to happen at that point that you press that seam. And we're constantly going to be pressing seams open and working with the iron when we're actually making this garment. So you want all of that shrinkage to be out of the way first. So you're going to want to wash your fabric, tumble dry it if you normally tumble dry your clothes as well, and then iron it with a nice hot iron and with the steam on as well, just to make sure that it's all those fibres have tightened up and that we're not going to have any shrinkage once we start to work with it. And that's what I've already done with this. So I tend to, when I buy fabrics, as soon as the day I buy them, they tend to go into the washing machine, so that anything that comes into my sewing room has actually already been pre-shrunk and washed and ready to go. And I just pop it in my ironing pile then when it's dry, iron it with my ordinary ironing, and then just fold it up and put it, well, fold it up or crumple it up, whichever, and put it in my sewing room so that it's then ready for use. So I know that this one's been used already, and all I need to do now is get my pattern piece, give this an iron, because this is too crumpled for me to work with, and same with you, because if you try and put a pattern piece onto here and there's a crinkle in it like that, when you're pressing it, sometimes you can fold a crinkle in underneath your pattern piece and you might not realise it's there. And then before you know it, when you open out that pattern piece is suddenly much wider than it needs to be, because that crease has got folded in. So you want a nicely flattened and fresh piece of fabric. The other thing to note is that if you've got something called a directional print, now this is a classic example of a directional print. So let's have a look at the selvage edge. So the selvage edge is here. So this is where it's printed, and it gives you these circles, and the circles are, or different shapes, are the different colours of prints that have been used in this making of this garment. And I can see there's 6 being used. There's 6 different colours in this actual fabric here. It often gives you as well the name of the fabric manufacturer and who it is. In this case it's an Tacks one, and it's made in France by Tacks. So again, you can got quite a lot of information. So your selvage edge is really important to note. It might sometimes be like that, or in our fabric here we've got this sort of like tightly bound edge with these dots in, and then a little bit of a ruffle, but that doesn't fray at all, so we know that's a selvage edge because it's not fraying at all. So we need to identify that. So we've got the north to south, and we can lay our pattern pieces all in the right direction. So on this pattern piece here, we sometimes need to buy extra fabric, because our pattern designer will decide that when they're designing, it's possibly for a pattern like this, where there's no real top and bottom or left or right, because the fabric is just multi-directional. But if we look on this piece of fabric here, we've got these little sticks that come out of the circles, whatever you want to call them. They look a bit like trees to me, but it depends on how they look to you. But if you're looking for these sticks, the sticks only come out one side. So if you cut one leg of your trousers this way, and then on another you turned the pattern piece around so that you cut it out that way, you would see that really noticeably on your finished garment. And likewise, if you had, say, I know there's fabrics with llamas and with rabbits and trucks and all sorts of things on it. So if you buy a fabric that you can only lay your pattern pieces in one direction, you need to look at the layout of the fabric to see whether or not that's going to cause you a problem. So in the instructions for your pattern, there'll be a suggested cutting guide of how to lay your pattern pieces onto the fabric in order to get the pattern pieces out of the chosen length. You might well know, if you notice you've got a directional print like this and the pattern designer has got 2 pattern pieces, one turned upside down and one the other way, you know you're going to have them both facing the same way in order to keep that flow of the fabric. Then you may well need to buy more fabric. Somebody in the shop, if you're a beginner, somebody in the fabric shop should be able to help you with that, and should be able to help you look at the design and see whether or not you need to get extra fabric or not, hopefully. But if not, then you can do a bit of research beforehand. But that's a classic example of a directional print where these sticks are only coming out one side of the design, so you can only lay your fabric pieces one way or the other. You can't have one going north to south and one south to north, because it's just going to mess up the finished garment for you. Unless it's a test garment and you're not bothered about that and it's only for use in the home, then that's up to you. Okay, so how much fabric should you buy? That depends on the size of garment that you are making. So you'll need to have a look in the pattern, and on the pattern and on the actual designer's site for purchase of the pattern, there will be fabric requirements for it, and it'll tell you what width of fabric, because there's different widths of fabric that you can buy, and if it tells you what width it is, it'll then give you a length to go with it that you need to purchase. So have a look on there and you'll be able to see it. If you need any help with any of that, then you'll have to give me a shout, or just speak to the person in the shop. Take your pattern along with you, or at least the instruction, the main instruction page. I wouldn't recommend you print out the main tutorial, because you can generally refer to that online if you need to, or like you'll watch me on YouTube on your tablet or on your phone whilst you're sewing, then you know you can follow a written instruction the same way. But the front cover of the pattern and the pattern requirements is actually quite useful to print out. Then you can keep that with your master copy and you've always got it. Okay, I think I've rabbited on enough for you for now. So the next stage for me then is to iron this fabric ready to go, and then I will show you how we actually pop the pattern pieces onto the fabric and then print and then get ready for cutting out. So if I can make any suggestions, if this is your first ever time working with some with a children's clothing or a garment of this size, my recommendation would go for a cotton, 100% cotton fabric to work with, because it's a dream to sew with. It's absolutely beautiful. Try and choose something that hasn't got a directional print, so perhaps stay away from stripes. A polka dot would be fine, because generally that can be abstract anyway, that doesn't have a right or wrong side. Or a plain colour, that'll all be fine too, so don't worry about that. If you are working with corduroy, then there's a couple of things to point out there. So let me just get some corduroy and I'll just talk about that for a second, just in case anybody does want to make a winter weight one and you're working with cord. Okay, so I've just got some corduroy here, and a corduroy fabric, in case you've not sort of worked with that before, it needs a bit of an iron, this one does, but it's got these like, they call them wales, they're like lines that go down, so it's almost like columns of tufted fluff, and if you run your finger on it, you can feel that there's a right way and a wrong way. One way feels really smooth when you run your finger down it, and the other way feels almost rough. And this is a very what's called a baby cord, so this is quite a fine textured one, but you get them that can go right up to jumbo cord, and they're really, really thick. So if you think about men's corduroy trousers, that type of thing, or a corduroy jacket, then you'll know what I mean by these lines going down it. What that means though is that when you are actually cutting out your fabric and your pattern, you need to decide which is the right way. So the right way, you choose which is the right way, is what I'm saying. So you might prefer that when you put your hand against the fabric, then, and if it feels rough to you, that might be the way that you want it to sit, going up or down. Or you might prefer that if you smooth your hand down it, that it feels all nice and smooth, and you'd prefer that to be up at the top on the chest of the garment, going down towards the legs. So you have to choose, in relation to the selvage edge, the bound edge, whether you want to be going north to south or south to north with all of your pattern pieces. It sounds a bit confusing, doesn't it? But if we use this pattern piece here as an example, so if we were chosen this way round for this fabric, I'd need to make sure that all of my pattern pieces all sit the same way with a directional print as well. I couldn't have one piece that way and then interlock another piece that way to get the best out of my fabric, because the feel of those two pieces, with one coming this way, the smoothness would be smoothed down, and on that piece the smoothness would be by smoothing it up, so it would look different on the actual finished garment and give it a different feel. So that's what I mean by, when you're working with things, you need to have things, when you're working with fabrics, that's why choosing something like the quilting cotton that has it's called a nap on a fabric when it does that. So it's like velvet as well, so it's got a slight velvet feel to it, hasn't it? That's a nap because it can either shade or be glossy, depending on which way you use it. Whereas with the cotton, then there's no problem with any of that. It'll go either way, so you don't need to worry about that. So yes, so extra things to think about when you're working with corduroy or with a directional print. Just be aware of that all your pattern pieces need to follow the same direction. Okay, I'm off to trace my pattern now. Okay, I've just received my dimensions through, my measurements through for the child that I'm making my dungarees for Eve, and she's got height of 35 inches and a tummy of 22 inches. So that's 89 centimetres for height and 56 centimetres for her tummy. Now, it doesn't matter whether or not they correspond with the exact size or not, because what I'm going to put up for you, I've put up this size chart for you, and what I've done is I've marked on Eve's measurements. So if you look at the chart in the picture, you'll see I've circled the height, and she's at 35 inches, so that's between 34 and 36, obviously. So we'd go for the highest because that puts her to 2 years of age. But then if we look down onto the tummy, for the dimensions that the pattern is drafted for, the waist of 22 inches puts her into an age 5, as you can see in that bottom blue panel there on the thing. And this is really common, and it's, you know, you've got to, we have to get out of the standard problems for sizing, because everybody's unique shaped and sized, and so whether you're making patterns, drafting patterns for an adult or for a child, it doesn't matter. We need to learn how to work with the measurements we've been given. If I made a straight 2-year-old for her, it would fit in the height at 36 inches high, but it'd be far too tight on her tummy. Likewise, if I made a straight size 5 years, then it would be perfect round her tummy, but it's going to have way too much height. Now, on a child's garment, we can argue we'd rather have more height because they're generally going to shoot up than they do tend to spread out. But we need to accommodate for this within the pattern. So what I would suggest you do as well is have a look at the 2 different size charts, and you can look at that without buying the pattern. Have your measurements to hand and just do what I've done. Just check and see on height and the other measurements that you've got where your child or, you know, your recipient fits on those size charts, because then we can talk about what we're going to do, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to blend between the sizes. And this is where, again, printing out all of the sizes of your pattern when you do it makes it really, really easy to do. And so we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to show you how I do that next. But I just wanted to pop the size chart up so you could see what I do. And you can use this comparison for your child as well. Just use different colours or screenshot it and grab it or whatever. And then that will help for you. So as I say, she's between the 2 pattern sizes. She's between the Alex Shorties, which goes up to the 2 years, and then the Sydney Dungarees, I've been told, are pretty much exactly the same. So we can just carry straight on with that. And she's actually in a 5 years for that one. So let's get on and blend these sizes. So first of all, here's our master pattern. We've got our red size 5 marked out as we had done before. But what I've also done is I've found the size 3, because I'm going to take, see, I want to work on the same pattern size, so I'm going to take her up to a size 3 on height, because that will give growing room then. So while she was in the size 2 for height, the size 3 on the Sydney Dungarees goes up to a height of 38.5, and I mean these are a summer dungaree as well. She could quite easily grow some more, so I'm going to just err on the side of caution. I'm going to blend between an age 3 years and a 5 years for the sizing. So I've highlighted then in this purple, but it's not come out very well because it needs a bit more time to wet. I've put on for the height, this is for the back lining, I've also highlighted in purple the line here for the size 3. So now what I'm going to do is when I put my lining over, because I had already started to copy this out, and what I should have done is done it at the same time I was copying it and I didn't, is that I now have, where's my pencil gone, a line to copy across here, which will give me the age that I'm looking for on height. So I'm keeping all of the width, I'm just knocking the height down slightly. 3 and just say, well, everything above her waist is going to be on an age 3 and everything below the waist is an age 5. So if you did want to reduce the amount of the width on these, we could then copy this down, this line down here as well, which is the age 3 line, and take it just out to the width on the age 5, making sure we copy all of our markings. So this in the sizes on the pattern is the difference between cutting out an age 5 and an age 3. So the age 3 there is just slightly lower at the sides, look, and obviously you could have that width on the front should you wish. Again, it's difficult, and without seeing the child, then you can obviously offer this pattern up to the child as well. This is the back lining, and just see how this fits. And this is being cut on a fold, so this would end up being double on your fabric. I'm trying not to make it complicated, and it isn't generally. You've just got to think about where the height is and then adjust really for her height. So again, I've just literally just put my pattern piece over the top. I've kept the width to the age 5 here, but I've just lowered this side bit down and then across the top here so that it's not looking too bulky for her when she's wearing it as a 3-year-old, which is what I'm going to be doing the pattern for. So I will then take my scissors, if I can find them, and then I will then take off the age 5 height that we've got. Just take that off just there carefully so that we don't shave anything off, because we want this pattern piece to fit. And then I'm going to cut that across there. What I'm going to do there is put height 5 waist and age 3 years height. You could even put on the Eve and put the date in. At the moment it's February 2023. So again, you've got an idea there of what you're working to. So what we need to do now is we need to go through the rest of the pattern, because I'd already traced this off, but that's not a problem at all. And then we're just going to change the pattern pieces. So let me just find the front pattern pieces and we'll do that with you. So let's have a look at this one again. So my red lines here are the pattern colours for the age 5, and the purple is the pattern colours for the age 3. So all I'm going to do is, if I was tracing this for the first time, let me just get my pattern weight so I can pop those on. Just to hold this still for me. And then all I'm going to do now is I'm going to trace off the age 3 for the top here. I'm going to then come across at the front, because I'm not going to take anything off this centre seam here, but I am from where it goes under her arms and across to the side. So I'm just going to take this down here, and I'm copying the age 3 line again for going under the arms, but I'm going to take that side line out to the age 5 measurement, because we want to keep that width on the waist. So again, I'm just dropping this front down slightly and keeping the width on the waist. So that then should fit her quite nicely. Now, you could also argue that there's some to take off the front, but again, I don't want to, this is the centre back here, I don't want to alter that. And you could take in on the back of the rise if you wanted to, for her going down. There's about an inch difference there. Is that an inch, half an inch? Just over half an inch difference in the inseam width. So this is the seam that goes between her legs from the crotch point all the way down to the hem. The hem I'm not going to alter, because I think children do well with length, and also you can always turn up the hem on a dungaree should you wish. But if you put this up against your child and perhaps it was for a boy rather than for a girl, you might want it a little more slim fitting, but I do think they need room to play as well. So in this case, I'm not going to change that inseam measurement. I'm going to keep that as it is. And again, dropping down this placket at the side, you could drop it down, but I'm going to keep to the age 5 because that's fine with what I want to do. So literally all I'm doing is copying off the age 3 onto the age 5, and then I'm trimming off just that extra height because we don't need that for our child. We need to make sure that we do this for every single pattern piece. The back pockets, I'd argue, have only got a minimal amount of difference, so I won't change that. The straps I'll probably keep at the age 5 because I think longer straps are better anyway. That helps with a bit of, you know, the distance, and that's not going to affect anything. But you need to do the front and the back pattern pieces, and then you need to do the front and the back lining pieces as well. So make sure that you alter those 4 pieces in order to make this difference, because otherwise these are not going to line up as properly as they should do when we put it together. Okay, so that was just a bit of a tip on sizing. If you need any help with sizing, then please send me a comment in the details below, or leave a comment on the video, and I will help you have a look at that and help you choose a size. And then if you do need any help with grading, then I can always direct you to how I can help you with that. Okay, I hope that was useful. The only other thing that I've just thought about is that it's often in adult dressmaking particularly, you make what's called a toile for your or a muslin for your garment that you're making, and in which case you can use an old sheet, you can use old duvet cover, you can use calico that you can buy fairly cheaply. You just need something that's a woven, so non-stretch, because this is a woven garment. But what you do is then you do your pattern adjustments to the best of your ability as to what you think you might need. You make up the garment, which is always good as well as a test, just so that you can try that on the child in just a really cheap, inexpensive fabric, because most people have an old sheet or duvet cover lying around somewhere that they can just cut up. And then you put that on your child and just see how it fits around the waist and around their bottom and their legs, and just decide what alterations you might want to make. And you can do that then before you cut into your precious more expensive fabric generally, and that's a really good way of A, you getting used to the pattern, and B, then you trying that on your child. Now, if I'm doing a muslin for a child or a toile, then I won't do things like the pockets. You can do the straps if you want to, but I wouldn't cut the straps as such in terms of sew them up and sew them together. You just want that length, and you could always just use a length of ribbon if you wanted to, and just measure that and put a pin up, or safety pin usually I use when I'm fitting children. I don't use pins, I use safety pins so that we don't poke them, bless them. And then you can then just try that on your child and just see how that fits, and that's a really good way of getting used to your pattern and how it all goes together before then you use your best fabric. And it's exactly the same for adults too. You can eliminate any fit issues then before you actually come to sew the garment up. Okay, so I've got my main fabric now marked out. We've got our main pattern adjustments done on here. The only things that I am going to change, just in order that I can demonstrate as much of these 2 patterns as possible to you, are that on the front of my garment I'm going to put a curved pocket, so I can show you how I sew that. So I've got that out of the Alex Shorties pattern. So again, if you've only bought the Sydney, then just stick with a square patch pocket, or you can round the bottom off if you want to and then follow the same instructions. You can just use the edge of a pudding bowl or something like that, something that's circular, just to give you that shape, because if you look at this one on here, the width is pretty much the same, it's just that it curves in before the pointed edges and then just goes round, if you can see that. Hopefully you can. The other thing that I am doing as well is I'm going to add the ruffle on the strap, because I think that's really cute. So again, this has been taken from the Alex pattern, and this is, I won't tell you the dimensions because that's not fair to the designer, but if you wanted to purchase that, then you can do, or you can take what you need from this, but basically I'm going to make this just a couple of inches longer, just to allow that for some extra strap length on there, and then I'll make sure that I can use that. So I'm going to use that one too. So there's a couple of extra pieces there that you might not recognise from your pattern tracing, just to make it right for me. The other thing is that I bought 1 metre of this fabric. I'm doing this size 3/5 hybrid, and there is more than enough for me to get this pattern out of, with loads at the end. So if I'd have wanted to, and you might choose to do the same to save on cost, or just cut buy what you need for the thing, is the lining could have been cut in the same fabric as the main fabric. There's enough to do that, but when I'm working with it, I want you to see the contrast between whether I'm working on the lining or the main fabric. So I've found in my stash this fabric here, which I think coordinates quite nicely with the pink and the green, so I'm going to use this one for my lining, but there would have been plenty had we have wished to use that from the other. Also, when I'm cutting out, I am going to cut out both of my straps in the same fabric. Now they say cut 2 out in the main lining, and cut 2 out in main fabric and 2 out in the lining, but I'm going to cut all of mine out in the same fabric. The reason being is that when you're putting these together, if you don't quite get your pattern, your seams right on the straps, you're going to have a bit of your lining fabric peeking out. Now that might not bother you, but on me I want these to look really smart, so I'm going to choose to put the straps in the same fabric as the inside of the straps in the same fabric as the main, because I've got more than enough anyway to do that, and that will give us a nice finish. I think it's more obvious the more of a contrast you use. So if you used, say, like I'm going to use colours for example, but if you used a black front for your dungarees and you got a bright red scarlet lining, then I would definitely do the straps in the same colour. If you've got a cream fabric like this and then you chose a cream lining, plain cream lining, or a small cream polka dot or something like that, then I wouldn't be so worried about it, because I don't think then that you'll see it, and obviously you can use contrast bits to decorate your dungarees as well. But for now, those are the bits that I've been trying myself in knots trying to get this to look right for you. It's always the same, isn't it? The preparation that goes into it. So I have now folded this piece of fabric and I've got my 2 selvage edges together. Now the selvage edge is the manufacturing edge of the fabric, and it's usually tightly bound. Now you can see this little frayed edge here, but don't worry about that, because look beyond that and you can see some little dots where the fabric has been loaded onto little pins that roll and take the fabric through, and that's a sure sign that you've got your fabric on the selvage edge. Also, these will not fray. Well, no matter how much I pull at this, it will not fray anymore, so I know again that that's the selvage edge. By contrast, if I look at the top edge of the fabric here, yes, we've still got that frayed edge there, but if I pull on any of these fabric on these threads, then they start to fray and I can pull loose fibres out of that weave, and that is a sure sign then that you are dealing with a cut edge or a non-selvage edge. So for making these dungarees, I'm keeping the right side up. You can have the right sides together if you want to, that doesn't matter at all, but I'm cutting my fabric out on the double, so there's no problem with mirroring pieces and things like that. I think that's just a step too far at this stage for these, but it doesn't matter which way, so long as your selvages are together. If you've got any obvious pattern going across, then make sure your pattern is matching at the selvage edge, so that you get your lines or whatever it is that you're working with straight within your design. Now when I'm looking at this pattern, again close up, it's completely ditzy and there's lots and lots of variety, but when you actually take a step back and you start to look, there's some lines that go down here that I can see. There's also some types of scallops that sort of go across this way as well, which is quite interesting, and certain flowers are following a certain pattern. Don't know if that's obvious from your distance away from how you're looking at this fabric. So I am just going to be aware of that, and I'm just going to show you how just the basic of pattern matching just on this ditzy to try and make it right. Pattern matching is a whole bigger ball game, which again is a reason why we want to choose a fabric that's fairly easy to work with at this stage. So for now, let's get on. So we have our pattern pieces. The first thing we're going to look for is our grain line, and we've got a pencil grain line, which is a long line with an arrow on either side. The first thing I do with mine is I get, let me get a longer ruler, here's one, and I extend that grain line further down the pattern. So I just extend it like that, just take the line further down, and if I can take it further up, then I take it further up, pretty much the length of the of the pattern piece. And that's because the shorter the grain line, the more chance you've got of it being off kilter. By extending it down to the top and the bottom of the pattern piece, you've got more chance of getting your grain straight, and that's really important in dressmaking. So your grain will either run north to south along your selvage edge, and we've got our selvage edge here, so I know this pattern piece is going the right direction, or with some directional prints sometimes you have to cut on this way. So if you had a lovely border print where you got a lot of detail here and hardly anything in the middle, then again you might want that detail to be around the hem or around the waist, and then you would cut on this way. But generally speaking, your best way is just doing this north to south or south to north along the selvage edge, which is the bound edge here. So roughly we're just going to place this on now and just have a look and see how our fabric fits onto our pattern, how our pattern fits onto our fabric. And again, we've got this different section here. Now with a non-directional print, you could turn one upside down and have one pattern piece upside down, and you can kind of nest it in together so that you use the best that you can. With this fabric, I don't think it is directional, but there does seem to be a bit of a pattern with that scallop going across within the design. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to err on the side of caution, and I'm going to put all of my pattern pieces the same direction. Now, again, we've got another grain line here, but it's quite a short one. So what I'm going to do is I lay a ruler up against that pattern piece where I can get a much longer run at it, so perhaps even there. So I've got the line on my ruler going up here, and now I can draw in a new line. So I'm not drawing a line randomly, I am copying the same grain line, same placement of the grain line, but I'm just moving it across 3 inches where well, 1, 2, 3, 3.5 inches from where I could see. And that means that takes it straight up the top of the garment for me, and I can put my arrows on the top, and I can write grain next to it so that I know then that I've got a longer grain line for getting my pattern straight. So that's good. And the other thing that I'm going to do now is we've got these 2 points here, which is where the crotch points meet. In order to try and keep pattern matching just at a very basic point, we want the pattern on the legs, and therefore going up the main body of the garment, to be about the same. So when I line these up, I'm going to have these crotch points matching at the same point across here. They don't have to be touching, they just have to be at the same point on the pattern. And being as this pattern's very busy, then I'm not sure where that is. But if I lie these 2 pieces next to each other, with that point matching and with the hems here matching, then I can be sure that that's going to be right. Another addition I'm doing to mine as well, which you may choose to or not, because we've used the age 5 pattern as our base, it doesn't have the snaps on the inseam between the legs. So at the moment there isn't enough fabric there to be able to do the button closure that I want to do, which if a child is still wearing nappies or if it's being toilet trained, is sometimes useful to have. So I'm actually going to add that in so that if you are doing the Alex Shorties, it has this alteration built into it, so you wouldn't need to do it, but on the larger sizes then you would. And all I'm going to do there is there's a 1 centimetre seam allowance allowed, and I'm just going to increase that to 2 centimetres, and that will give us enough then to put our buttonholes onto these 2 pieces at the end. And the way that I'm going to do that is you can either have a spare bit of tissue paper if you want to. Let's just pretend we're using this at the moment, and then you could sellotape that on, you could follow the line, draw an extra line and extend that pattern out. That's one way. The other way that I'm going to do, which is probably a little bit more, what should we say, quick and dirty if you want for a better phrase, is that I will just extend the pins at this point out by 1 centimetre with the pin heads, and then I will then just copy that down the edge of the pattern with my pins just to give me that extra 1 centimetre. And then when I come to cut, I will cut this side of my pins rather than on the pattern. Again, and I will do that on both the front and the back of this inseam, just this short seam here, the way it goes between the legs, just down the hem of the trouser leg. Okay, so those are the things that I'm just doing, but if you don't need that alteration, you just cut yours straight out as it is, and you will just ignore the reference that I make when we come to doing this part. Again, I'm just trying to cover both patterns in one tutorial for those that might be using either, because the majority of the construction is identical for these two dungarees. Okay. So let's have a look at our grain line. I need to just clear some space. Let me just clear some space and then we'll talk grain lines. Okay, I've now separated out all the pattern pieces that I need for my main garment. So I've got my dungarees front, I've got my dungarees back, I have my strap piece, I have my ruffle piece because I'm going to put the frill on the shoulders. I've got patch pocket because I'm going to put 2 patch pockets on the back. And I've got the round pocket because I'm going to put a round pocket on the front so that you can see that. So those are all the pattern pieces I need. On these pattern pieces, we have nothing that needs to go on the fold. So on the fold here, I've put my 2 selvage edges together that are here. And then that gives me an automatic fold at this far side here, which is just out of camera shot, but you'll get the idea of what we're going to do in a minute. The first thing I'm going to do is start placing my pattern pieces to try and get the best out of my fabric. So with this one here, this is longer, the front is longer than the back, so I'm putting the front one on first and I'm just roughly placing that so that it's in a position. I know I want to match up these crotch points and I know I need to add a little bit extra in between, so I'm just separating those across, but to all intents and purposes they're on the same point. And the first thing we're going to do now is get these 2 pinned down because these are our 2 main pattern pieces that we're going to use. The rest can fit in around with the spare fabrics that we've got here and here. So in order to be confident with what I'm doing, the first thing I'm going to do is do this one, which is out to the side. And I'm going to go to the bottom of the grain line and I'm going to put my tape measure up against that grain line and I'm going to measure all the way across to the folded edge of my fabric. Now let me just see if I can get both of these on the camera at the same time because my camera won't go any higher. So I've got my tape measure right up against the grain line just here. I'll be doing it again higher up so you'll be able to see. And then I'm taking it right across. So we're just under 59 centimetres for my distance. Your distance may well be different. And then I just put a pin going down the grain line, just to hold that still for me. The next place we're going to go is right up to the very top, up here. And I'm going to put my tape measure on that same grain line, on the extended grain line that we've drawn, and I'm going to take my tape measure right over to the side here. Now I can straight away see that that's measuring just under 57.5. So I know that that's not my 59 that the bottom grain line is on, so I know this piece is twisted. So what I'm going to do is just going to bring it slightly in because we need to have room to twist this to make sure that it's going to go right. So let's go back down again and I'm going to measure across now and I'm now can adjust it so that I'm 57 at the bottom and I'm going to put that same pin in the grain line now that I've readjusted that at the bottom. I got it too close to my selvage edge for the top bit. And now I go to the top of the grain line again and then I measure across. So we're at 56 at the moment, so I know the pattern piece needs to go across this way a little bit more to give me a centimetre extra. So I move my tape measure, move my pattern piece until my grain line is on the 57 centimetre part. I then put a pin at the top of the garment. When you get to the top, if you get very, very close to the top of your edge, just make sure that you can see both cut edges there, because sometimes it's not cut straight, so like this fabric isn't, and if this was the other way round, I might lose the top corner of my pattern piece. So that's something really important to watch out for. So let me just double check that again. So let's go down to the bottom, make sure nothing's changed. So 57. And then I go back up to the top again and I measure again, and that's at 57. So I now know that this pattern piece is straight on my fabric. As long as my selvage edges are together, then the fold will be in the right place, and as long as I've got no creases underneath my fabric. So then the next thing that I'm going to do now is, leaving a little gap between them so we can do that extra 1 centimetre, is I'm going to now measure the bottom grain line for this one. And this one should be easier to see because it's closer to the edge, but I needed to get that first piece on over to the far side. So again, let's put our tape measure onto our grain line and measure across. And I think that we'll go to 24.5 with that one. So I've got that one at 24.5. So again, let's put a pin either on the grain line or at the bottom in the hem. And then we're going to go to the very top again now, and then we're going to measure across, and we want to be 24.5 again from the top of the grain line. Now this is really, grain lines might seem like a faff, but it's really important to get used to using those, because if a garment ever twists on you or won't sit right, that's generally because it's not being cut on the same correctly on the grain line, and we need that to be straight up the garment. The other thing that we can do is check that our bottom of our hems is pretty much straight as well, because we want these crotch points to be together. I've got one slightly higher than the other, so I'm just going to pull mine down, because that will just help with the pattern matching if there is any pattern matching. And then I'm just going to release that at the top there, and it was straight anyway, so I've just smoothed that and made sure that's still right. Okay, happier with that, with the hems being at the same place and the crotch points being at the same place, and I'm comfortable now these are on. So now I'm going to go ahead and pin these pattern pieces into place onto my fabric, and I pin just inside this, just in the inside edge, about every couple of inches away, and that will just hold this pattern piece flat for me. If you prefer to, you can put pattern weights onto your pattern, and then you can use chalk to trace around the edge, or a indelible marker, if you're not indelible marker, a Frixion pen that comes out to mark around. I like to pin. I think that things don't move so much, but even if you pin and then draw around it, you can do that as well. So there's a bit of license on there because the different people have different ways they prefer to work. And this is, you know, I'm acknowledging that there are other ways of doing things besides what I'm saying to you. If you're a beginner, just follow me though, because it has worked for me. But if you've already got your ways, then just use your ways. So we're just going to go ahead now and just pin all these pattern pieces on with our pins, these two main ones, and I'll come back to you when I'm ready to start placing the other pieces. Okay, so we've got two main pattern pieces pinning on. Now you shouldn't have any ruffles in your pattern. You should be able to run your hand along your pattern piece without getting any, just watch out for your pins, otherwise you'll stab yourself like I just have done. But you shouldn't have anywhere where the pattern wants to crease and cause a crease in it at all. If you have, you've kind of moved your fabric, or you've moved your pattern as you were pinning. So just take that pin out, release that extra room, and then just put your pin back in again. Likewise, when you move your hand over your fabric and over your pattern pieces, you shouldn't feel any creases underneath your fabric, because otherwise, again, your fabric's not lying straight, and that's important to make sure that it's lying straight. So the next thing that we're going to do now is just to have a look at our other pieces that we've got to put on. So we know we've got our ruffle. That won't fit quite in there for me because I need to leave that extra room. Let me just remember to do that actually. If I do that now. Next thing I'm going to do then is look at my pockets, and we've got another grain line on here. So let me find my ruler again, and we will just draw that line in to make it longer, so we can be sure that that's not going to twist as we're working with it. Okay, and I can put this down into here and slot it down, and that will fit in just nicely in just there and use that space up. So let me now get my tape measure. And again, I will then measure from the bottom of this grain line across to the point, and that's 47.5. So let's just pop a pin at the bottom. Let's go to the top of our grain line and measure again, 47.5. So yeah, we were pretty straight already, but it just makes sure that we are straight there. I've also got my round pocket. Now I only need one of my round pockets, so if you wanted to, you could just wait until you've got a scrap of fabric and then cut that out as a scrap, so that could probably fit up there. And then what else have we got? We've got our strap as well that needs to be cut out. And on here we've got a crossways grain line. If you look, we've got arrows going north to south and east to west. So it doesn't matter, what that means is it doesn't matter if your pattern piece is placed this way or whether it's placed that way in line with your selvage, it'll still do the same thing. So I think for over here, we are going to do our straps over here. I can line that up. And I think what I'll do is I'll extend the line of the selvage of the grain line right down the bottom of my pattern piece. So I'm just running the ruler down the side of the pattern edge and following the line of the grain line, and I've just made that just longer. So I can pop that on. And then do the same thing. Just get into it, becomes automatic in the end, so that's 7.5. Let's just put a pin in the bottom there. And let's go to the top, and that's just under 7, so I know it's not quite straight, so I just straighten it up until I can measure 7.5 to the grain line where I was. And it is important that straps are straight. So again, that piece is on now, and I've got enough to cut another strap out to the side of it, so I will do that. And then the only piece left for me to do is put my ruffle on, and that again has both ways for the grain line. So on this case, to use best fabric, rather than stretch it all the way down the side there, I'm probably going to just pop it along just there, and that will just give me a nice, I can follow the edge of the hem there, and that will tell me that we're about straight there anyway. Again, now we've got these pieces all placed on, just go along and put those onto your fabric, and then we're going to be good to go. And so we're just about ready now to cut out. And so what you can do is you can either use your scissors to just cut round, and you cut around trying not to take any off the paper pattern that you've got pinned on, so you keep the paper pattern intact, and you just go in the other side of your line, so you can cut that out. And it's just simple, just rest the bottom of your scissors on your work surface and lift up like that, so you're going through. So you don't want to lift the fabric up off the top off your work surface when you're cutting out. You want to keep everything all nice and flat, because if you lift it up, you can distort the grain of the fabric again, and we're trying to keep that really straight. And the other thing that you can use, if you've got a self-healing mat like I've got here, whoops, let me just show you, like this one here, the green one that I've got underneath, then if that's a self-healing mat that's used by quilters, then you can use a rotary cutter, and that's a razor blade that's on the edge there that's exposed by pulling the cap back. Have to be really careful if you're using these, and you can cut that out without having to use your scissors. Depends what works best for you. But go ahead and cut out your pieces now when you're ready. I mean, if you want to, just double check your grain lines before you start cutting. Just make sure you've got all of your pattern pieces on. If you're short of fabric, make sure you've read everything. This is cut 2, that's cut 2, that's cut 2, this is cut 2, and this is cut 2. So we know that we've got those pieces. Just a thing on the frill, actually, just mentioning with cut 2, actually I'm going to cut 4 of my frill, because whilst the frill on the Alex Shorties only has a rolled edge by an overlocker, I don't like that finish, so I'm going to do mine as a double-edged, a double one. So you're actually going to need to cut 4 of the frill if you're following my instructions and the way that I do things. So cut 4, but you can choose that at the time when you're doing it. And again, I'm going to line my straps in the same fabric as I've got for my main body of it. So I'm going to cut 2 of those, so just slightly different to the instructions, because you know me, that's how I like to do things. So I'm going to cut these out now, and then we can talk about marking any relevant points that we need to mark, and also we're going to talk about neatening edges and what we need to do to neaten those before we start sewing. Okay, frustration thing about video tutorials, the camera changed angle for me on my last section where I was pinning out the lining, so I'm going to leave it pinned because I'm short of time today, and I'm going to talk you through what I've done. So I have got all of my main pattern pieces cut out, and I have got them still attached to the paper pattern onto the fabric that they cut out from. That helps us understand where we are, and staying organised is key. So I've popped those out of the way. I've then taken my lining fabric, and whilst we could cut it out the same way where we put the two selvage edges together and then we have just one fold, what I find is more economical with fabric and leaves us with the bigger bit all more readily available to us, is if we do a double fold method. So this is where I fold one selvage edge in, and then once I've folded it, I then measure from the folded edge to the selvage edge, and this is the bound selvage edge, top and bottom, to make sure that that's the same measurement, and that will tell me that that piece of fabric is then straight. What I've done then is then use the fold of my pattern piece here, and that's denoted by the long line with an arrow on either side, just at right angles, and I've always put the word fold on next to it so it reminds me, and obviously it reminds you, because if you were to cut this out inadvertently on the, without the fold, you'd struggle to put it together, because you actually would need to add an extra piece of fabric in to make your seam allowance. Likewise, if your main bit of fabric that you want to use doesn't have a fold long enough, but you can cut out fabric from inside the main portion of fabric, you'd have to add seam allowance onto the edge of your piece before cutting it out, because you'd need to then join those together to make it the right size for your folded piece, if that makes sense. So the beauty of having it on the fold is that you don't have a seam line down the back here. Move it over here, but you don't have a seam line down the back here. It just sits nice and flat, and obviously that'll fold out and be double. And I would recommend that you fold your fabric this way, so that you fold it in, the selvage edge in, and do your measuring to make sure that it's straight before cutting it out, and then you can go across to your other piece and do the same. And this way of laying your fabric out gives you one fold and two folds, which can be a more economical way of using your fabric. So I hope that helps. Also, when you are folding and you've got a repetitive pattern like this one is, you can see the design following up the edge of the fabric. You can see whether that is slightly off. So if the fabric was going the pattern was going off slightly like that, and that line wasn't straight, I would know then that this piece of fabric isn't straight. But your safest way is always to measure from the selvage edge out to your fold line, and that will tell you that that piece of fabric is straight. I also know that it may seem like I'm being really fussy about the grain always being straight, but I believe that it's one of those invisible success things that is that you can tell. If you just come along and just plonk your fabric pieces down, your pattern pieces down on your fabric, and you don't care about your grain lines, sometimes there's something just off with the finished garment. It just won't lie right, it won't iron straight, there's just something with it that's not right. So I know it takes time just to measure this, but the more times you do it, you get really quick at it, and it then means that you build in that automatic success point with everything being straight of grain before you even start to do anything else. So I'm trying to say I believe it's worth the time. So that's why I'm stressing the point that it's worthwhile doing, because I do believe that it makes a big difference to your clothing, your finished garments, and what you make. And if you go into all this time and effort to make them, then let's make them as best as possible, shall we? So now, lecture over. Apologies, I'm not trying to lecture you, I'm just trying. There's so much I want to just pass on to you that, and hopefully will click with you, that's why I end up saying all of these things. So that's why it makes my videos very long, but hopefully there's lots of little gems in there for you. So I'm going to cut these out, and I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to move on. Okay, so the final piece of the cutting out jigsaw is that we need all of our interfacing pieces here. And so I've got here some fusible interfacing. Now this is a lightweight fusible interfacing because the cotton fabric we're using is quite light. It comes lightweight, medium weight and heavyweight, but there's also a super lightweight. And this isn't super lightweight, this is just lightweight. And what this will do is it's got a little bit of strength to it in one direction, but it will pull apart if you pull it the other direction. But it's got little knobbles on the back of it, which are actually little glue dots. And so there's a right side which is lovely and smooth, and then there's the knobbly side, and that's the wrong side. So the wrong side always goes to the wrong side of your fabric, and it's like an invisible bit of reinforcing, if you like. And it just, we cut it out and then we'll iron it on with our iron, and it will reinforce that section. We particularly want to use this if we're doing any buttonholes, and also on facings as well, around necklines. We've not got any of those on this garment. It just gives it a little bit of structure, really. So we're just going to take our, you can buy this online, so don't have to worry about it, or you can go to your local sewing shop and support your local sewing shop as well, which is always a good idea, isn't it? Because they do such a good job, don't they? So what we're going to do is we're just going to put our interfacing onto our pattern pieces for our interfacing onto our masterpiece of interfacing, our yardage of interfacing, meterage, whatever you want to call it. And again, we're just going to lie these down, just trying to get the best we can out of this piece of fabric. The other thing that I am going to do is do a couple of strips as well, because I want to put those on the inseam of my dungarees, because again, I want to put the button, I want to do the button placement on there so you can see me do that and how I do that. It's really straightforward, but it will just show you how to do that. So let me just give this a little bit more and we'll be able to pop that one in there as well, I think. And again, you can see I try and eke out as much as I can out of all my precious supplies, because it does cost money, and if we can save a few pence here or there, or something else is we don't have to use quite so much of it, then I'm all for that. So literally I'm just going to bunch all of these up together, and then I'm going to use my rotary cutter to cut these out, because that'll get in between those lines really carefully. And I've just got this folded over with right sides together. I don't worry so much about the grain on my interfacing, because it's going to be attached onto the main fabric anyway, and that way it also does just sort of reinforce it. But it's a good thing to have, and I save all my extra bits that I cut off as well and keep them in a little plastic pot, and then if I just need a little bit, I can often just go there and get it. But for today I didn't want to be faffing around with that. I just wanted to be able to cut this out with you. Okay. So I hope you're enjoying all of this so far. I know that there's been a lot of prep. We're getting about ready to start our sewing and what have you. We've just got a couple of steps to do, and then we'll be ready for our actual sewing. But yeah, the excitement is building. I know I can feel I want to just keep going and going and going with this. So I hope that if this is your first foray into dressmaking, you don't feel that I'm making it too tricky or too difficult. But hopefully it's making sense to you and you're enjoying seeing the process if it's the first garment you've ever made. It's a really sweet one, this one is as well, because it looks quite technical when it's made, but I think it's quite an easy pattern to follow. So I think you're going to enjoy it, hopefully. Lovely pattern drafting as well by 5Berries as well, the pattern designer. So I think she's done she's on to a winner with this one, with the details that she's got into it. The other thing I did notice while I was just doing so looking at the difference between the two patterns, is that the Shorties, the Alex Shorties, has got a yoke at the back, at the centre back, and I'll tell you how we're going to work with that later on. But just for now, I just thought, well, we'll just keep it simple, but we'll cover that when we get to it. So we've got our long strip for our strap support, we've got our interfacing for back and front of the side plackets where the button closures will go, and then we've got the interfacing for the front. Oh, that's the inseam interfacing, that needed to be longer. Okay, I'm just going to cut another longer piece because that needs to be long enough to go from there to there, and that piece is, so we'll use this piece here. And that's probably about twice as wide as I need, so I'll just cut that in half. And then we'll be able to use that for our buttonholes. Okay. I will now get my thread together and we'll do notches and tailor's tacks, because there's a couple of places where I want to add tailor's tacks to the pattern, just to make that easier to understand and just to give us those clues when we're working with our flat fabric. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do next. So the next section that we're going to work on now is doing our notches and our tailor's tacks. So there's never any notches or tailor's tacks on your interfacing pieces. They're always on your main bits of fabric. So put that to one side. I've got my lining on top here. So all I do then is just have a look round all of my pieces. So this is the back lining, and we have got a little notch just here. So I'm just going to do that. Now, if you're using big scissors, make sure you just use the very points. Make sure you not trying to do your notches like this with your fabric right across, because if you nudge yourself or you press a little bit harder, you risk cutting straight into the main bit of the fabric. So just use the very points of your scissors and just make one single notch or cut just a couple of millimetres in your fabric. Can you see that? It's just a very small one. But it's just enough when you're looking along the edge of that, you can give it a little pull and you can just see that notch just opens out. That's the only one we've got on that piece. Then I put that one to one side, and I don't want to put any tailor's tacks on there, so that's fine. So again, on the front here, not got any notches or any tailor's tacks that I've noticed. Hopefully I've picked them all up from the side. Nothing on the straps either, so that's going to go to one side, or on the frills, that can go to one side. And then I'm looking at my dungarees on the front here. Now, we haven't got a notch, but we have got a line for a front pocket placement. So I'm just going to mark that with a tailor's tack. So let's put that into one side. Pockets, the square triangular pocket, patch pocket, we haven't got a mark on there, or on the rounded pocket we haven't there either. And then have we got anything on here? No, so we haven't got many notches at all, in which only that one on the back, which is fine. But we have got some places for some tailor's tacks, so let's do those now. So I've got a hand sewing needle threaded with a contrast colour, this very dark, it's almost like a navy blue, isn't it? And I'm going to mark the pattern placement for the 3-year-old pattern. I had marked it for 5, but I've changed it to 3. And in order to do a tailor's tack, what a tailor's tack does is it marks on all of your fabric at the same time where certain things are going to be. And then you'll see as we move through making these exactly where we're going to use that. So to do a tailor's tack, you take your thread. There's no knot at the end, and my thread is just double. And you then take a little stitch. So it goes through your pattern and through your fabric. So the pattern's, flat on the table while I'm identifying where my tailor's tack needs to go. But then I just put my fingers underneath so I can work with it, making sure that everything's still as flat as it can be. And then I pull it through, but I leave about a 2.5 inch tail on the end there. Hopefully you can see that. And then that's east to west, if you like, or west to east, and I always get mixed up, but it's that direction. And then I'm going to take another one that is north to south, or south to north as I'm going on here. And then I pull that through until the loop is about 2.5 inches long as well. And then I snip my thread, leaving the same length of tail. So you've got this like tufty bit with a loop and 2 ends to your thread. And then I snip through the loop. And that is a completed tailor's tack. We're going to separate it in a second, but let's do the other side first. So now we're going to go to the other side of the pocket placement, and I'm going to do another. It doesn't matter which way round you start, whether you do east to west first or north to south first, but you want the middle of that thread, leave a bit of a longer tail there, that's it, to be on the actual point. So the middle of that tailor's tack is crossing, the threads are crossing on the exact point that that tailor's tack is marked, that of that placement mark. I think that's right. And then cut our tail again, and then cut through our loop. Let's just put our pin ladle to one side so we keep it out of the way, because you have to be careful when we're making children's clothes not to leave any pins inside. So the next thing I'm going to do is remove the pins from the top half of this garment now, this pattern piece. Just put them to one side. Oh, don't stick in there. And so it's just below where we're going to be working with those tailor's tacks. Just take these out quickly, bear with me. Don't want to go inside my pin cushion. Right. And then what we do then is we then ease back the pattern pieces And we just keep our fingers on the threads just to make sure they go smoothly through the pattern pieces. Sometimes they get a little bit stuck, so that's fine. And now we can see that we've got these thread marks on our garment, exactly in the position where the marks were on our pattern piece. And then what we do is we pull then our two pieces of garment apart carefully and gently until we've got a bridge of threads. And then when we've got a bridge of threads like this, we just snip through the middle of that, being careful that you don't catch your fabric with the edge of your scissors, because it's so easy to cut through and to cut those as well. So that's one done. And then let's do the other one very carefully. And then if we look here, we've got these two places marked and we've got these two places marked, and that's always in the same, they're all then in the same place. And so long as we don't get confused and pull our bits of thread out when we're working, and we shouldn't because we know they're a completely different colour to the garment, then that will tell us where those pattern placements are. So I've marked those two places for the back pocket placement, and I am just going to mark it again on the top pocket placement here, just because I think that's a nice and easy way to mark it. So again, it just helps us put that placement, doesn't it, on there. So there we go, a little stitch. And as I say, this is another little trick that you can use that just means that you get really quick at doing these. And I'm just putting one, just this side of the seam allowance on the centre there, because we'll have a centre front seam. And then that will just hold that in place. And then I can peel back my pattern again between these places just here. Carefully peel off my pattern piece and just fold it back. Separate my two pieces of fabric to give me a bridge of threads, and then I just snip through both of those. The other thing that we can do, and it depends on how you're going to be finishing off the seams, because on a cotton fabric, here's a scrap, on any cut edges you start to get fraying like this, and certainly when you are washing your garments you'll get fraying. So it is a good idea to do some kind of seam finishing. Now for these I'm going to overlock them because that's the finish that I want on these, and I've got an overlocker. But don't worry if you haven't. You can always use the zigzag setting on your machine, and I'll go through that with you in a second. But you can also use, if you've got some, you can use pinking shears. And pinking shears have got these triangular blades on them, and they cut little bias edges as they snip, and the bias edges don't fray. You might get a few little threads going off the top, but it's not going to come off in a great big long line like it does here. So if I just use this on this little scrap, and just so we can see how that's got long threads on that we don't want to have on our garment. If we then use the pinking shears and cut an edge, we can see that triangular edge that it's cut. But you might lose a few threads off the top, but you're unlikely for it to be long enough to start and make a big fray. So they're a really good cheap option. If you've not got an overlocker, you can use these. The only thing is that when you snip with them, like here, you take off a bit of your seam allowance. So if you're going to be using pinking shears, don't neaten your edges until you've sewn that seam, because the way that I sew is I use the cut edge as being the edge of the fabric to tell me how much seam allowance there is. And if I take off this, then I'll be losing a couple of millimetres of my seam allowance before I try to sew it, and therefore that couple of millimetres over a number of different seams will make the garment smaller. So therefore that's why I say that if you're going to be neatening your edges with pinking shears, wait until you've sewn that seam first and you've used your seam allowance, then you can trim it like this and trim it off. Just be careful not to cut through your garment. Otherwise, we're going to do a zigzag, and I'll talk to you about the zigzag stitch in a second. And then we're going to talk about interfacing as well, not interfacing, overlocking as well. So for now, I'm going to pop these to one side because I'm going to set up my machine for a zigzag stitch so that you can see what I mean by zigzag stitching for the neatening edges, because neatening is the next step we're going to do in the construction. unless you're using pinking shears, then you're going to wait. And then once we've done the neatening of this, then we are then going to finish this as part 1. This is all of the prep ready to go, and then with part 2 we'll actually start with the main sewing of the actual garment and prepping all the pockets and the straps and what have you. So we're getting there, we're making progress, and I hope you're enjoying it so far. So let's get on to zigzagging. Okay, so what I recommend you do is when you're looking at getting your machine set up for your zigzag, is that you use a scrap of fabric, and I've just got this scrap here that we were just demonstrating with the pinking shears on. And I just line that up on my machine, and because the needle has to go through the gap here, let me just open this up and show you. Because the machine can only have this gap here, you want to line up your fabric so that the fabric is on the edge of that little gap there. I don't know if you can see my finger through there. So you want to be able to line it fabric up so you can just see a smidge of your fabric there, because what you want is you want the zig of the zigzag to be in the fabric, but the zag, if you like, over to the right hand side, you want that to be just off the fabric, so it kind of over edges this goes over the edge of the fabric for you, and that way it'll just hold on to those threads. And the idea is that where they're going quite long here and they just keep running, the idea is that if they hit the peaks of the zigzags, they can't go any further, and so it stops them from becoming long and tangled like this. That's the idea. And zigzagging is a great way of neatening your edges, but as I'm hopefully going to show you, there's a couple of things to look out for which makes it better than others. And I'll explain why and what I mean by better than others. So all I'm going to do now is just change my machine over to my zigzag stitch, and you'll need to look in your instructions as to how you do that. And then I'm just going to sew for a short space of a couple of inches, just to give us an idea of how that's looking. I've got a contrast thread in. I've got this navy blue thread in on this light coloured fabric, but you would use a fabric, a thread that hardly shows up at all. So for this I'd probably use a cream or an off-white, and that would be the best one to use. So when you're ready, let's just start going and just do a few stitches and just see how this is looking. So I can see already that my stitches are starting to bunch up. So let me just take this out and show you what I mean by that. So if I were to neaten the edges on my garment immediately with my zigzag, can you see how just here, let me get my awl because that will help me point. Can you see just how here the fabric is actually being pulled in and is being tucked under, and there's actually a pleat under here where the fabric has been turned under by the zigzag stitch. That's not what we want, because if you run your fingers along that, there's quite a... Whoops, charger just fell off my work surface. If you run your fingers along there, there's actually quite a ridge there. And when you've got this folded back on the inside of your garment and you iron from the top, sometimes you can see that ridge when you iron over it. So we're trying to avoid that. So what I'm going to suggest we do is we're going to let the tension off slightly. So the tension is what makes the stitches tight. And I'm going to take mine down to a 2. So mine was on between about 4.5, and I'm going to take it down to a 2. So quite a big difference, because I don't want it to pull this fabric in. I don't want that ridge on the inside, but also if we neaten all the edges before we start to sew this garment, you can see that again, like the pinking shears, has taken off a couple of millimetres when we were doing that with the pinking shears, and we spoke about how that can alter the size of your garment. The same thing with your zigzag stitch. It's actually cinched that in narrower than the fabric is here, and so we need to keep that original seam allowance straight and intact, because we're using that to measure from for our seam allowance to make sure our size is correct. I would recommend that if you're using a zigzag stitch, again, you wait until after you've finished sewing your seam first. Then I would then open up your seam and take each side of your seam individually and your seam allowance, so that you can then press those open. Or if we're pressing them together, and we'll talk about that as we're going through the construction, that when it comes to zigzagging, you zigzag those together if we're pressing them to one side and having them together. So that will be my recommendation anyway. Okay, so this is my overlocker. It's a Janome and it's a 9300DX. It's a pretty good machine. I just got a bit of an issue with mine because my cutter, because an overlocker cuts as it actually neatens the edge as well, which is why people like it so much. We'll do a little bit on here. I've got it lined up with my white thread, so it might be a little bit difficult to see, but we should be able to see how it cuts off this edge as it works. It's quite noisy when they are working, but they're a great addition to your tool, if you a tool to your sewing arsenal if you're wanting to upgrade your sewing. So it just works like this. We've got it all set up. This is small, and if you can see, it's cutting the fabric as it's sewing. That's a blessing and a curse. So the blessing is that it neatens the edge as it's sewing. And just straight off there we can see the overlocked edge on there, this little edge that goes over the edge here. That's the front and that's the back. It's the same stitch that you'll get on the inside of industry made garments as well, so it is quite a recognised finish, but there's no way that's going to fray at all while it's got an overlocked edge. Oops, sorry, press the button. But what it does do is it cuts anything that goes under the cutter. So if you're not careful when you're loading your fabric into the machine, and say you're wanting to neaten this edge here, but for some reason you've got a little bit extra kind of caught up underneath, you will lose the bit that's caught up underneath that you might not want to lose. And so you really do have to have your wits about you whilst you're sewing with it. You don't lift up your presser foot in full like you do on a sewing machine. You just lift up the toe of the foot and just introduce the fabric, oh, don't go the other way, up the toe of the foot and put your fabric under there, and then the feed dogs that are under there will feed it through. You can also have all various different stitches with it as well, which are always good. But today's not a lesson on overlocking. It's just we're just talking about neatening the edges. So that's the stitch that we're going to be using on our dungarees to neaten the edge. And actually straight out the box from my last setting that I had, it is pretty good. So we're going to stick with that. It's lying flat. It might be stretching it out slightly. So I'm just going to move my stitches slightly closer together. And then we'll give it another go and just see if that's better than the original stitches were. Yeah, that's slightly better, I think. I could just see that this was just curving out, just fanning out slightly. And this is why the people talk about overlocking sort of being really difficult to adjust. They are and they aren't. It's just getting used to them and getting used. I've labelled my machine up with some stickers to say which is the different thread, so that I can use my tension dials to neaten it up and to adjust it quickly. And also on the side there's something called a differential feed and also a stitch length. So again, that can alter how things are actually moving through. Because you don't want it to fan out your seam as you're neatening it, because then when you come to sort of stitch it together, when you're sewing the two sides together, you'll have a wavy edge to it, and we don't want that. We want the overlocking to sit really nice and flat against the bed of the machine and to be straight. So I think I'll do another test just to make sure that is the case before I then work on doing some more of my neatening. So let me just, that's all ready. Okay, so if you are overlocking, take one of your pattern pieces at a time, remove all of your pins. We've got those sections marked. The only thing that I will suggest you do is just put a tailor's tack. Where was that section? I think it was on the lining, wasn't it? Yes, where we've got the little cut notch, I'm just going to put a little tailor's tack. Oops. Where we've got the little cut notch just here on the side, I'm just going to put a little tailor's tack just inside that, just to mark that, because when I overlock this edge, we're going to lose the placement of that notch. So it's just worthwhile doing that. Also, when I overlock, I'm only taking off whiskers off the edge of the piece of fabric. I am not taking any millimeters or anything off the edge of the actual fabric, just those little threads that just pick up. So just make sure you line up your overlocker with the edge of there, just to take those off and nothing more. So I've just put a tailor's tack in there, so that's marked. And then with all of your other pattern pieces, you're going to then take your pins out, and then you're going to start and overlock most of the edges. Now, I don't overlock the straps, and I won't overlock the frill at all because we don't want to add any bulk to those areas. But I will pretty much overlock singularly all the rest of the seams. Now, I'm having to do that because I'm going to be travelling when I do the rest of these shorts, and I won't be taking my overlocker with me, but I will have my sewing machine with me. So I'm kind of, I may be overlocking at this stage, but I can, I don't want to miss out on doing any part. So if it was with you, stop, I keep pressing my foot on the button for my overlocker, sorry. If it was you, you might want to wait until you've finished your garment or overlock as we go along, so that you don't have, because I'm going to be doing these singularly, and it might be when it comes to it that we push those seams to one side and then we only need to overlock one edge, but I can't do that when I'm on the road, so I'm just going to overlock these edges now. I am going to do pretty much every seam. Yeah, I'm going to do all of the seams, not seams, all of the edges of my fabric on the back, dungarees back, the dungarees front, the lining front and the lining back. I am also going to overlock the edges of my pockets as well, but I'm not going to do my frill or my straps. So there's one finished piece, my first one, got caught up on that pin. And so when I finished overlocking any pieces, I just take the pattern piece again and just secure that to the fabric, the cut out fabric, with a pin, just to hold that ready so that I still know what that piece is. And I just do that with all of them. So just to say, that's the end of part one now. Hopefully I can fit this all onto one video. That's all of the prep ready. And then when we do the next stages, we'll be ready for sewing the actual garments together. So I'll see you on the other side of doing that. And I'll actually be in France when I'm doing that. So I live in Spain at the moment, and we're going on a trip to France for a few weeks. So that's going to be a bit exciting. But I've been told I can take my sewing machine with me by my husband. So that's good. So we're going to be carrying on with these when we're in France. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I know there's a lot of information to take in. You won't need all of this prep. I'm just covering so much because I'm trying to help you and trying to impart all this information. If it's overwhelm, I'm sorry. Just watch the video back on the parts that you're not sure, so that you can gain an understanding. And as we start to make things, I'll go over some of these points again and again, and then you'll just be like, I know how to do Tailor's Tacks now, Claire. So you just fast forward on to the next section. So, you know, that's the beauty of having chapters in the videos, which I put into my videos, so that you can just jump ahead. Anyway, whatever you're doing today, have a great day. I hope you can get all of your prep sorted and that you're ready then to start sewing when I am. Take care, everybody. Bye.